We are dreaming of a world without borders, of achieving the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals with a new breed of leaders who think borderless beyond the quick win now mindset. I am Lina, Executive and Leadership Coach. Together with Duncan Skelton, Catherine McGillivray-Pronto, and Tatiana Petrova, we believe that there is a way of relating that opens up understanding, belonging, transcendence, and possibility that removes unnecessary boundaries. Through monthly dialogues, we co-created the 6-part podcast series called Borderless, Discovering Borderless-Cenred Leadership. These are unscripted live recordings with minimal editing centering around 4 principles: act now future-oriented, iterative and anticipatory, humanistic and interspecies, and say no to yes. Have a listen and join us in leading through a borderless lens. Theme for today's episode is on iterative and anticipatory as one of the principles of borderless-centered leadership. To me, iterative and anticipatory is about listening actively. It's about learning, unlearning, and relearning. And it is about sensing and scanning the horizon for signals, early signals, and be ready to make adjustment accordingly. Iterative and anticipatory is about being agile in decision-making. So there is a sense of non-linearity to it. In the book, Emergent Strategy, Shaping Changing Worlds, Adrienne Marie Brown, the author, describes iterative approach as an ongoing process that involves iteration and refinement based on feedback and experience. So I think there is also an element of anticipation, expecting changes all the time. I'm Lina, Executive and Leadership Coach, and with me today are Duncan, Catherine, Tatiana. We'll try to explore the emotions and the quality embodied in iterative and anticipatory leadership. How do we hold these qualities at the same time? It really is about the external stimuli. The world is changing all the time. And there is, and how do we embrace it? And that is part of the principles that we actually see it. We can see that, pick up the signals. What do we need to be anticipatory, to be expecting that change is happening? But that is okay. And that is part of that non-linearity.
Iterative is the first word. The images, metaphors that come to mind are those of athletes training or a sculptor building a sculpture. There is a vision, the idea of where it's all going. But then there is this iterative process. There's abundant patience and adjustment, what you've just talked to, Lina, right? Like adjustment. To be able to work with what is, right? What kind of stone I'm cutting through, I'm sculpting, what I'm learning from it, how I can work my idea into or out of the stone, right? Same, how my body reacts, what are the conditions of the training, all of that, right? And the best, so the idea of stamina and patience and hope, kind of practicing hope, comes to mind. And the best metaphor that resonates with me right now is one of a child, the leader called a baby, who is learning to stand or to walk, right? So the amount of iterative rounds of just attempting the act of walking or standing, right? And they come up and fall, or they try a step and they fall and they crawl a little, and then they use something as a support. They stand up again and do it and do it and do it until all of a sudden they walk, or they talk, or they jump. What is informative for me in that example, beyond patience and stamina and hopefulness, is the fact that the child is never disappointed with himself or herself. There's no like, okay, God damn it, another fall, I'm just not good enough, I'm never gonna make it, right? I'm just not make it, right? None of that nonsense. They just keep on practicing the action. And when I'm thinking about iterative and anticipatory in the context of leadership, and the particular type of leadership that we are kind of evoking here in the conversation, which is anchored and open and expansive, expanding, I think that is also very important, that there is no sense of error. There is opening to what is and learning from it, rather than creating any disappointment and blame, either outwards or inwards. You just practice.
I like that metaphor. I actually wrote down leadership is like a yoga practice rather than a yoga pose. And while you were talking, I had this image of when I was living in Hong Kong and going to yoga practice and everybody being very competitive, 50 people crammed into a room, all trying to do the best yoga pose, either the tree or something else, and the teacher going gently by and adjusting people very slightly. And when you're being adjusted, you also have to be willing to be adjusted and not take it personally. So you also need that kind of, I don't know if it's self-awareness in that moment, because you probably can't see what you're doing wrong, but you have to have that willingness to, for the iteration to come along and for the support. And we see that also in children as well, that sometimes they're willing to take the help when they can't do something. And then sometimes they might push you away and say, no, I can do it myself. And so in this borderless-centered leadership, we need also this kind of willingness to accept help from others and to accept that nothing is ever perfect, and that there will be some adjustments, and that some people might be able to help you to make those adjustments and to accept that support. So that's why I was seeing it more as a practice. It's a yoga practice, or a musician always practices. Even the most famous musicians practice constantly. And it's not to reach perfection. It's because also there might be something on that day that they hear differently, or they feel differently, and they want to pass on differently. And for me, that's the iterative part of leadership, as I see it.
Yeah, I love that. As I was trying to remember how these words came to me, as I'm listening to you guys, I remember now that it goes back to when I was doing oceanography. What I was doing was is a particular methodology or concept that how do you predict the whole ocean currents. So there are starting conditions, or the different parameters, the water salinity, water pressure, etc., to start certain things. And then you project with this, with these conditions, what will happen in 5 days, in 5 years, in 10 years. So you just let the model to run. There is another process called data assimilation. What happens is it will merge some hypothesis, some supposedly this is what will happen, and then add in actual data from in situ, actual measurements of the different conditions of the water in the water, as well as satellite images, satellite data. at certain point, you add that information in. So these are the, in a way, it's the signals. And then with new information, the trajectories is not just going straight out. So you adjust it. We have new information after, let's say, 5 years. And then you let the model to run another 5 years. This is experiment years, not the actual years, right? So it is like this little bit of adjustments. So that is what, in my mind, that, as a Borderless-Cenred leader, to be able to sense, to pick up the signals, what is going on right now. And that is part of that anticipatory part. The stance that one is taking to me is more like able to just let go, not hold on to, but this is the truth. This is what starts out this whole journey. So we have to be truthful to that or be loyal to that. But things happen, things changes. Systems are in a constant movements. So how do we be able to see the signals and actually embrace the signals instead of ignoring that, I don't believe it. So that is part of that anticipatory part.
Every time you speak, Lina, I discover something new about your experiences in the world. I look forward to your autobiography. Seriously. What I hear in that is, if change is a characteristic of the environment, and we have to constantly be willing to change with each iteration, with each position within the practice, to be repositioned and take input, then there's a quality, a way of being, which is the acceptance of change, or the willingness for change. Just to be ready, the idea that adaptation, modification, change is a requirement. And like, if leadership, leader as a young child, a leader as curious little one, like, kids don't, in that sense, seem to have an ego. From what I recollect, there's just an excitement for every new thing that shows up. So a real lack of resistance to change and a willingness to not even to let go. It's more like letting go isn't the conscious choice there. It's just the interest in the thing that's showing up now. So a real, I guess in that sense, a real presence, lack of ego and a real presence, which for me plays into this idea of impeccable attention, from the sort of tradecraft of the warrior way, like performing with impeccable attention to the signals, to the environment, detached from ego. And that there's something here that seems playful to me. Iterative and anticipatory. If iterative is to be present and to pay impeccable attention, anticipatory is then to be looking to the future, to spend some time looking at likely outcomes and anticipating what can be anticipated in a world of change. And in order to add some agility to that, looking to the past for patterns that play out, patterns that recur as major events in the world build. So anticipatory and iterative to me has this sort of playful combination of being rooted in the present, spending some time anticipating possible futures whilst learning lessons from the past. So it's kind of this sort of almost agile movement based in the present, looking, taking short forays into the future, being cognizant of past patterns and data.
And if I could add to that, for me, it's not just about being rooted in the present, it's also about being rooted in who you are, and not losing that. I think that's where there might be a difference with children, because children are still forming their personalities, whereas we normally know who we are, what is important to us, what our values are, what our purpose is. And even though everything might change around us, it doesn't mean that we have to change as well constantly, and that we have to change everything. I think there's something important that has to stay, and that's who we are rooted in. And what is, presence also comes from that, is who am I as a person? What is important to me? What are my values? Is one of my values integrity? Then I'm going to stay, even though I'm being asked to adapt to changes around me, I'm going to still be a person with integrity and not let my integrity waver. So for me, there's the waves coming at me, but I still have to be this kind of strong pier, standing and not knockable over, which is not an English term. Maybe you have a better term for that, for Duncan.
I love that you speak to identity, and that being almost like the anchor, the life buoy in the sea that you can cling to. And like when everything else is changing, this is the thing that keeps you anchored. And there is something about agility. Like I have conversations regularly where that when we talk about authenticity in leadership, it can be used as a reason for not changing. So I want to name a distinction between being rooted in authentically who you are, grounded in that sort of inner compass, and the idea of range that you can expand in. So in delivering software projects, there's a different energy that supports different phases of the project, from the initial ideation, requirements capture, through focused implementation, and then the actual landing the plane down to a launch point is like almost the opposite of creativity, where you're changing as little as you can possibly get away with. And almost on an hour-by-hour basis, you're looking at defects and quality levels coming and getting them to a point that is acceptable based on current working definition. And so, it could be reasonable you have a different leader for each of those phases of a project. So staying rooted in who you are, knowing that you are acting with integrity and authenticity, and that you can move within this range, this leadership range that we've developed as well, where you can grow that range without compromising integrity.
It is a very important principle that you are outlining right now for the borderless-centered leadership, because when identity becomes this and nothing else, it is a border in its own right. Right, so it becomes stagnant and walled. What you're talking towards is it's still anchored, but it's alive. It can grow, it can expand, there is range. There is also choicefulness around, is it still relevant identity, right? Because it grows for life. I love this question. I've heard it in one of the TED Talks. When people are asked about the music they loved 10 years ago, they go like, oh my God. Right? But when they are asked about what kind of music you are expecting to love in 10 years from now, they assume it will be the same one that they enjoy at this moment. So then we look forward to extrapolate ourselves, but the reality shows that there's quite a bit of change happening along the lifeline. And of course, some things stay, but some things do grow out of taste or in the taste, etc. So kind of taking the notion of identity that is expandable and that is alive and can grow as well, which at the same time stays anchoring and has that anchoring capability, is an important thing for the borderless-centered leadership, I feel.
Yeah, I really love that identity is part of it here now, part of this concept and principle. A lot of times in these long-term projects, I've been doing international development work for a couple of decades now. There is an end game. We want to have this impact. We want to have, for example, poverty reduction, for example. We want a certain or how many more people, how many more schools will be built, And then this will be, and better education for this particular district, let's say. Let's just kind of put it a little simpler. And to get to that point, we're talking about We will have more teachers, or the teacher-student ratio will be higher. We will have actual buildings to build. And, 2 years down the road, certainly the government has changed, the central government has changed or whatever, that there's less funding. They cannot, allocate it to this program. So these are the kind of the external situation. So even though ultimately in 5 years' time, we want to have, better education access to, a group of people, we need to change it. We need to change some of the targets. Maybe we cannot do it. This cannot happen in 5 years' time because the changing environment, the political systems change. But we are still focusing on getting education for all. So it is that kind of signals that we're talking about. It is iterative. It keeps changing. We have to rework, reimagine, and anticipating, knowing that in a year or two, the current government, there will be an election, there will be some changes. What are we going to do about it? While ultimately, we all want to have education for all, for example.
I think, emergence in that. So if iterative is to cycle around, to modify, to run the next experiment, to enter the next phase of development, knowing, anticipating external changes, systemic changes, then the agility part is about being able to respond to all of that and to work with what is emerging from ourselves as leaders, as we change, as the environment changes too. And I think I was struggling with that a little bit prior to our conversation today. Like the anticipatory bit for me, I couldn't balance anticipatory with emergent. And if it's true, and it works for me, Tatiana, I'd not heard that, then, when I think about the music I like 10 years from now, it's going to be similar to the music I like from 10 years ago. It's this idea that we create our future based on our past experience. And if we create the future based on possibility, then we get to create something better than we can imagine. And so to be anticipatory means to fit within the context of what I can imagine, and actually what I want to anticipate is something that I can't even imagine yet. So anticipatory versus emergent versus like what I dream of, trying to balance those three I was struggling with. And I think you helped me there, Lina. Thank you.
I think certain qualities are required for that, though. It's not something that comes easily, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've already talked about ego. I think we have to be willing to let the ego go. Humility, patience, and yes, there is a part which is about reading signals, and there's also a part about trusting your own intuition and being able to combine the two together. So not just reading the data, absorbing the data, analyzing the data, but also trusting your own gut feeling about what is going to be right for the future. So some also self-confidence is required, I would say, that your gut feeling is the right feeling. And I think that's where the mind and the body and the emotion come into play together when you're being both iterative and anticipatory. You have to let the whole of you come into play, and not just use the head, for example, or the emotional part. That it has to be a combination of both.
Because that intuition is a strong signal. And
Yes.
to be less attached to being whether it's right or wrong, but trusting that as a signal, that intuition is powerful enough. It's an urge from which to take action,
Mm-hmm.
with the responsibility of whatever impact that has, of course.
Yeah, I like that part. So the intuition is really that sensing, and it's not so much as right or wrong. Maybe one example could be also, the role of AI in coaching. So we know that this is happening, AI is happening. So what will coaching look like in 5 years' time, 10 years' time? So the signal is that AI, this technology is there. And, there's lots of applications coming out from that. But how do we as coaches adapt around it? So what do we do? How do we, in a way, adjust our course of action? What is future of coaching be like?
I love the invitation to be iterative anticipatory within my own coaching practice.
What is happening for me right now as an interesting takeaway from this conversation, a couple of questions, and that is, what is it that I'm really practicing in my life right now? I'm just involved in and do, but what am I practicing? In that practice, how am I iterative and anticipatory? And where the source of those two is. And then where do I anchor myself in? So is it the interest of the child, Duncan? Is it the identity in how I'm experiencing right now, Catherine? Or is it the goal and vision, Lina? Right? So those perspectives of where I'm anchored in as I'm practicing and iterating and anticipating my growth. And those are really interesting questions for me. So I don't have an answer top of my head. But whoever listens to this podcast, I invite you to play with those questions if they resonate.
For me, I actually find that you need to bring in so much of yourself in there. It is almost like you have to be in 3D to manage to pick up the signals, to be constantly scanning the horizon, what is coming up, and be ready to respond, to change course if necessary, or reevaluate, what I have set out. Would that still work? So it's constantly questioning. And I think in a way, sometimes it can be quite challenging. But holding on, for me personally, the sense of letting go seems to help me, that, there is a certain invitation to dance in the moment.
I'm thinking about the large surface area required of a leader exercising leadership from this principle. It's like a 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional surface area as well. Because it is about, if leadership is about supporting, leading a group, other people, or a team, then it's about that impact. So, relationship to uncertainty. What is our own relationship to uncertainty, and how does that impact the spaces we're working in when change and uncertainty show up? That's a big surface area. There's the operational stuff, the tactical stuff, being able to read the signals, being able to think about the future and anticipate it, being able to design experiments in the short term to test out theories and collect more data, to have one eye on the past, to look at patterns, to help predict the way things are moving, all while paying attention to the humans that are in the system and how your being impacts them, being willing to share what is true for you in an uncertain world, what is true for me is very personal. Being intentional about anticipating the impact you want to have. It's a huge surface area to cover, I think.
Yes, and from a practical perspective, I see two different dances going on. Leaders have to be iterative every day. They have to constantly adjust, even their own emotions, their own whatever's going on in their lives. They have to come in willing to adjust to what's going on in the real world, in the now, staying attuned to what's going on now, And very often they have little space to go into thinking about what if, or what about if this happens, or what's going to happen in 5 years' time. They have much less space to do this in the real practical world, what I'm seeing in leaders today. So we need to be able to make that space, but I see it as two different dances, and that's often where there's the struggle, is that you're doing this iterative dance constantly, in your own little hamster wheel sometimes, going around, and having this space to look at out from your balcony, or from your helicopter, or wherever you are, and looking into the future is much more challenging, and requires much more, I think, determination and courage to focus on.
Leadership is a practice, and that means falling, adjusting, and going again, without judgment. This is Borderless. Join us next week.